Is your yard saving the earth, or is it killing it? That's not a question most people would ask themselves. It's not a question many of us ask each other. We design and build landscapes for a living, and we plan those landscapes in such a way that it will reserve utilization of air conditioning, it'll help reduce heating costs, and also improve our overall environment. As you can see in many of these houses here, you don't see a lot of grass in these landscapes, and that's very intentional, and I'll explain why. Oxygen levels currently are about half they were from prehistoric times. That with the increase in population, with the increase of use of CO2 generated by fossil fuels, we've also seen islands of trash being formed out in the Pacific Ocean, and the burgeoning populations are just using massive amounts of oxygen. We've all heard about the greenhouse effect, and the thing with the greenhouse effect is the trapped CO2 within our atmosphere. So the sun radiates into the earth, and much of that is what warms our planet. But much of it reflects back off of the oceans, bouncing back out into outer space. But as CO2 increases, a lot of that heat gets trapped within the earth. CO2 comes from us breathing and from the use of fossil fuels. Thankfully, trees essentially inhale that CO2 and exhale oxygen. And what it does is it actually absorbs that carbon into the tree's fabric or the shrubs or any of the living materials that we have. The ginkgo biloba tree is this yellow tree here, and it's noted for being the tree that is longest in history in some of the empires in China. Now, this tree doesn't just sequester CO2 for a year or a century, but actually for millennia. The same tree has actually been in one of the courtyards for over 2,000 years. So the carbon that it's sequestering is almost permanent, and trees give us that benefit, but they also give us other benefits too, where a tree can reach down into the subsurfaces of the earth and pull water up from below the ground, where a lot of our water is irrigated here, and it's at the uppermost levels, where a tree can reach down and pull things up. But it also does something else. In driving those roots down, it allows water to re-enter into the sub-water levels, where we all get our water from. When we think of trees, most people think of the big one, the 40-foot tall one. And I don't want that in my yard. It's way too big. However, there are many, many different kinds of trees. These three trees are all in the same family. They're all redbuds. The biggest one is a Canadian redbud, and it gets to be 40 feet tall and 40 feet wide. The Chinese redbud is the middle one, and that one is perfect for using in a residential landscape because it only gets about 20 feet tall and about 20 feet wide. Now, for many of the people that we work with, perfect is that it's not going to block their solar panels. They're not going to have to worry about it falling on the house. It doesn't have invasive roots and is quite beautiful in the spring, as you can see when it's in flower. But for those of you that still don't like tall trees, there is the lavender twist redbud that only gets 5 feet tall at its biggest amount. It's a small weeping tree that we use for ornamentation. Now, trees have another very good beneficial effect if you use them wisely. If you notice, this tree is positioned in front of a window. If this was a south or west facing window, it will block the sun's rays from coming in the window. But this particular tree, which is a pear tree, loses its leaves in the winter. So in the summer, it blocks the sun's rays from heating the house, but in the winter, all the leaves come off, and it allows it to heat the house. So that reciprocal nature of leaves on this tree is perfect for our environment. It's creating the CO2, it's cutting the use of fossil fuels for heating and cooling. We've done a very, very good job on the inside of the house. All of these appliances here have been made low water usage. And we've gone about as far as we're going to get with reducing the amount of water inside the home. But on the outside of the home, we haven't done such a good job because grass is the most thirsty plant that we have in the landscape. But yet, it has become our tradition to use grass as the primary thing in a landscape. And that is because in the 1960s, somebody came out with a lawnmower. The lawnmower enables us to have more and more grass. Now, there was a study done in 2005 by NASA, and they found that the United States has 40 million acres of grass in homes. Now, that did a great job at sequestering 13 million pounds of carbon. However, this is compost, and that steam, as it appears to be, is actually methane gas. And methane gas is the primary gas in gasoline. It has 4 hydrogens and 1 carbon. So what you're seeing is the sequestration of the carbon into that plant material, now returning directly back into the atmosphere. So the grass that we hear that creates a lot of oxygen and doing all of the good isn't so good. This house we started working on back in 2008. If you can imagine this, their water bill for the front yard was $1,200 a month. Now, I've put an arrow on this house so that you'll recognize it when you see it 8 years later. This is the same house, sans the grass. We had left a little bit in for pathways and such, but look at how much more oxygen will be produced by those trees. And there's no doubt it's a beautiful home. This is the backyard. The backyard also has no grass, and it has beautiful walking gardens. But the really staggering thing that most people don't recognize is that their water bill now is $129 a month for twice the space. So they use 5% of the water per square foot than they used to use when they had grass. So if you have to use grass, there are a number of grasses that have been come out in the last, I would say last 2 or 3 years. This is a Bermuda grass. Now, a Bermuda grass has the problem of going dormant in the winter, so it does turn brown. However, you can overseed it with a temporary grass if you want it to be green all year. But Bermuda uses 40% of the water, and with this new underground drip systems, you can reduce that even further. But there are also other things. Carapia is brand new. It has only come out in the last few months, and it used to be an invasive weed until they figured out how to sterilize it so it won't spread. But Carapia, when it's cut, looks just like grass. Yet, it only needs to be watered for the first 30 days of its existence. Then you water it whenever you need it to. So rather than cutting that green and throwing it away, the Carapia will stay and grow much more slowly. Diamondia, next to it, the silver carpet is what it's called, doesn't need to be cut at all. And it's very pretty. It's just a matter of getting used to looking at silver instead of green. And Myoporum is a third option, The thing with myoporum, though, is it's difficult to walk on. So if you like to look at a yard that is nice and green, myoporum is the good choice. Now, synthetic turf, the godsend, or is it really? We did this yard, and we have used synthetic turf quite a bit until we realized that through this study by McCarty and Clemson, that it has a very big negative downside that we hadn't considered. The ambient temperature, being 94, is the temperature outside. And if you see, the Bermuda grass only went up to 104, and sand went up to 125, which explains why it's so uncomfortable to walk on a hot day on the beach. Same with asphalt. Asphalt goes up even more. But look at the artificial turf at 164. Now, if we all put artificial turf in all of our houses, can you imagine how hot this community would be? So we have to consider that, but there are places to use artificial turf. In this picture, you'll notice that the artificial turf is in the shade. And yes, we do use artificial turf, but we try to use it sparingly. That is a good place to use it. However, with a useful life of 20 years, when we are done with that artificial turf, those islands in the Pacific of the trash are going to start looking green. What are we going to do with all the artificial turf, which is plastic, after its useful life? Now, it's not that I'm bad-mouthing artificial turf, because I said we do use it, but it's something we have to consider. Now we get to the hidden polluter, and this is one that none of us think of. Each human being in the world accounts for about 3 yards of concrete. That's how much concrete we use worldwide. But what people don't recognize is that this is a furnace used in which to make cement. Cement is the binding agent that holds together sand and gravel to form concrete. It uses 5% of the world's energy. 5% of all the BTUs comes from making cement. So we have to be careful in what we're doing as far as cement goes. So we choose to use, this is called decomposed granite. So in ancillary walkways where you're not using it every day, you're not bringing it into the house, through strolling gardens, we will use the decomposed granite or gravel or some of the more natural materials. There's 2 reasons for this. One, we're not going to run into the BTUs associated with cement, but it also allows water to pass through it. Because when you use concrete, it will shed all of the water out into the street, into the drains, and back into the oceans. And as we know, the ocean levels are rising. But 45% of this community's water comes from wells. We need the water to get back down to the wells where we can use it. So, is your yard saving the earth or is it killing the earth? Do you have enough trees in your landscape? And have you thought about the fact that we have clear-cut so much of our forests to build the homes that we live in? And we have really destroyed Central America for all of the beautiful woods they had there. The reason why our oxygen productions are falling worldwide, our oxygen levels are falling worldwide, is because we have eliminated so many trees. So in your yards, I would encourage you to start adding back trees or shrubs or any long-lasting plant materials, and try to avoid the synthetic ones because of the heat that's generated. I really don't want to live in Arizona. I want to live in California. Thank you.